Hi, this is Tad from Island, and today I'm joined by Jason Trunk, who's an enterprise architect based in Dallas. Hey, Jason.
Hi, Tad. Good to see you again.
You too. Hey, so you were just telling me about an interesting customer you're working with, a bank, who's using the Island Enterprise browser along with their existing virtual desktop environment in a kind of unique way. Can you tell me more?
Absolutely. So this is a very large financial institution that they empower their remote workers and some of their contractors as well through VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure. You might hear it as desktop as a service, but this is the VMware, the Citrix, the Windows 365 Cloud PC. And the challenge they had was it's a very thick install. It's tough to maintain a master image, and they wanted a more streamlined approach to really support these workers on all types of devices that they're coming in with.
Yeah. And how are we integrating with Island in this case?
So it turns out that most of the time, the users inside of these VDI sessions, they're using the web. And VDI is a very expensive way to use the web. It's also not a great user experience. I mean, you have to download the client, you have to log in, you get an unfamiliar desktop. And then the first thing they do when they get in the morning is click on the internet icon and they go to work. And so taking those internet applications back to a natural state, the state they were meant to be in, which is that natural web browser to server type communication, really improved things. And it also really changes the way they had to design the whole system. Well, if you think about it, when you do start a VDI or a DaaS implementation, there's a lot of factors to consider, right? You have to consider all of the applications that you need access to, which now are mostly on the web, but you also need to worry about the network route. And the network route is still very important. So often within a VDI, it's loaded up with all of the networking infrastructure, a lot of agents, different routes, and the software has to be just right. You have to be able to trust that endpoint. You have to be able to trust the operating system within the VDI. And what it ends up being is a very expensive proposition to load up this VDI and try to maintain this master image that you need to duplicate for all of these users. And we're hearing, and one of the things we learned was that master image is out of date, usually 2 weeks after they make it. So it's very difficult to keep that current and keep the infrastructure on the back end connected.
Yeah. And since we're talking about a bank here, this is obviously there's extremely sensitive information flowing across that network and potential financial and customer records that are being consumed and viewed. So obviously that those networking considerations are top of the concern for the security team.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with Island, because we have the Island private access, the browser itself becomes the only way to access those internal apps. And so the thought was, well, what if we just give them access to VDI and then put the browser inside VDI? So instead of having to worry about, SASE agents or zero trust agents inside the VDI or even VPNs, we literally just give them the autonomy to even get a public VDI if they needed it. So what that means to the bank is that they're no longer locked into these large contracts with some of these large providers, because part of that stickiness was that network connection that was established between the two. And now if you take that out, they get so much more freedom, but yet so much more protection as well by understanding and mitigating all the risk going in and out of the browser.
Yeah, that sounds like a real improvement compared to trying to route all that at the VDI level itself. We're saying we can, if you have other apps inside your VDI that don't need to make that network connection, they can exist as normal. But if you have to make that connection back to your bank network, that goes through Island Private Access.
That's exactly it. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have the fat apps. You still might have those thick client apps that you need access to. But those files, instead of going direct from those thick apps, once they're done with the work, they take it into the browser and they make that secure connection back into the infrastructure.
Yeah. How does that improve the user experience?
Well, I don't know if you've ever used VDI or desktop as a service, but it's sometimes not the best. It's okay for a lot of users who have gigabit connection and they're okay with a new desktop and that kind of thing. But a true native client experience with a web browser to a server, you just can't get any better than that. And the reality is there are a lot of remote workers who are on low bandwidth connections. And the VDI, because it's delivering pixels from the web, that makes things very slow to render. And oftentimes productivity suffers a bit for that. And so that's no longer the case. You have the fastest potential connection by using the browser. But in the case of the users that have the VDI plus the browser inside it, that's the different class of users we were talking about before. You still do have the VDI connection. But because we're not routing every single thing from that operating system level and only the things we need to route, it does actually improve the speed as well from inside the browser, inside the VDI.
Sure. Yeah, because we're not doing that kind of double route of each network path back to the bank's network. Anything else you learned in this engagement?
Well, it's interesting. VDI, most of the clients have a web interface as well. And because we're the browser, we can compel users at the bank to access this VDI through the browser. And you might say, well, that sounds backwards. Why would I want to do that? Well, the reality is governance is a big thing we learned from the banks. They want to govern all of these interactions with these applications, including the thick client applications. So what that means is that if you put the VDI access through the Island client, through the Island browser, you now get the ability to screenshot, protect everything, and watermark the entire VDI session, which they've never been able to do before. You get keylogger protection from whatever desktop they're running on and opening that up. And things like, a copy and paste staying in the VDI. So everything is logged and recorded if you need it to be, including the clicks, including the keystrokes that are done within VDI. That turned out to be a massive win for the bank because they've never had that level of detail before for their governance.
That's great. And not only they're collecting that, but within the Island Management Console, it's very easy to see that data. You can see a very clear timeline by user, by device, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, hey, thanks for sharing this story today, and we'll be sure to have you back on here soon.
All right. Thanks so much.